The silence in the trauma bay was not empty. It was heavy, thick with the scent of antiseptic and the metallic tang of fear. In the center of the room, surrounded by a phalanx of white coats and flashing monitors, stood Alina Vance. She was 28 years old, wearing scrubs that were slightly too large for her frame, her hair pulled back into a severe bun that did nothing to hide the tremor in her hands. But it was not fear that made her hands shake. It was the adrenaline of a mind working 3 steps ahead of everyone else in the room. Dr. Marcus Thorne, the chief of surgery at St. Jude's Memorial Hospital, stood with his arms crossed over his chest. His posture was rigid, his jaw set in a line of granite disapproval. He looked at Alina not as a colleague, but as an obstruction. A glitch in the smooth, efficient machine he had spent 20 years building. Around them, the rest of the surgical team watched with a mixture of pity and morbid curiosity. They knew what was coming. They knew the hierarchy. And they knew that Alina Vance, the junior resident with the quiet voice and the strange, outdated textbooks, was about to be dismantled. "Step away from the patient, Ms. Vance," Thorne said. His voice was low, controlled, and carried the weight of absolute authority. "You are compromising the sterility of the field. You are delaying critical care." Alina did not move. Her eyes were fixed on the monitor displaying the vitals of the man on the table. Arthur Pendleton, a 70-year-old former architect, lay unconscious under the bright surgical lights. His chest rose and fell in shallow, ragged gasps. The monitors beeped in an erratic rhythm, a digital heartbeat that was slowing down. "His pressure is dropping," Alina said. Her voice was soft, barely audible over the hum of the ventilation system. "But it's not hemorrhagic shock. Look at the capillary refill. Look at the skin turgor. It's not blood loss." Thorne stepped forward, invading her personal space. The air between them crackled with tension. "I said step away. We are preparing for an emergency laparotomy. The CT scan showed free fluid in the abdomen. That means internal bleeding. That means we cut. Now." "If you cut," Alina said, finally turning to look him in the eye, "you will kill him." The room went still. Even the nurses stopped their preparations. The anesthesiologist, a man named Dr. Evans who had been there for 30 years, lowered his mask slightly, his eyes wide. No one spoke to Marcus Thorne like that. No one challenged his diagnosis in his own operating theater. It was professional suicide. It was insubordination of the highest order. Thorne's face flushed a deep, angry red. He pointed a gloved finger at the door. "Security," he barked. "Get her out of my OR, revoke her privileges effective immediately. I want her badge on my desk within the hour." 2 orderlies moved toward Alina. She did not resist. She did not argue. She simply took off her gloves, dropped them into the biohazard bin with a precise, deliberate motion, and walked out of the room. As the heavy doors swung shut behind her, sealing her out of the sterile world, she heard Thorne's voice rise again, commanding the team to begin the incision. She leaned against the cold wall of the corridor, closing her eyes. She could hear the beep of the monitor through the door. She counted the seconds. 1, 2, 3. She knew exactly what was happening inside. She knew exactly how much time Arthur Pendleton had left. And she knew that if she was right, the people inside that room were about to make the mistake of their lives. If you are feeling the tension in your chest right now, if you can sense the injustice of a voice being silenced when it matters most, take a moment to hit the like button. It helps us bring these stories of hidden competence and moral courage to light. Subscribe to join our community of viewers who believe that truth often speaks softly until it has to shout. To understand why Alina Vance was standing alone in that hallway, waiting for a disaster she had tried to prevent, you have to understand the ecosystem of St. Jude's Memorial. Located in the heart of Seattle, St. Jude's was not just a hospital. It was an institution, a fortress of medical excellence that prided itself on precision, speed, and protocol. It was a place where mistakes were not tolerated, and where hierarchy was not just a structure, but a religion. At the top of this pyramid sat Dr. Marcus Thorne. He was a man who believed that medicine was an engineering problem. If you followed the steps, if you adhered to the algorithms, if you trusted the technology, you would get the right result. He was brilliant, undeniably so. He had published hundreds of papers. He had pioneered new techniques in minimally invasive surgery, but he had also become arrogant. He believed that intuition was a relic of the past, a superstition that had no place in modern medicine. He believed that experience was secondary to data. Alina Vance was the opposite of everything Thorne represented. She had joined the residency program 6 months ago, slipping in through a special diversity initiative that many of the senior staff resented. She was quiet. she kept to herself. She didn't attend the happy hours at the upscale bars near the waterfront. She didn't network. She didn't play the game. Instead, she spent her nights in the hospital library, reading journals from the 1970s and 80s, studying case reports that had long been forgotten by the digital age. The other residents mocked her for it. They called her the archivist. They laughed when she carried a physical notebook instead of a tablet. They whispered about her background, speculating that she had only gotten in because of her connections, or because the administration needed to fill a quota. They didn't know that Alina had grown up in a remote village in the Pacific Northwest, where the nearest hospital was 4 hours away by boat. They didn't know that her grandfather had been a country doctor who practiced medicine with little more than a stethoscope and his hands. They didn't know that Alina had learned to diagnose illness by listening to the breath, by feeling the pulse, by observing the subtle changes in a person's demeanor that no machine could detect. In the break room, the atmosphere was always tense when Alina entered. The conversation would stop. The laughter would die down. She would make her coffee, black and strong, and sit in the corner reading. Today was no different. The news of her expulsion from the OR had spread like wildfire. By the time she walked in, 10 minutes after being kicked out, the room was silent. Dr. Sarah Jenkins, a second-year resident who had once been friendly with Alina, looked up from her phone. Her expression was a mix of sympathy and self-preservation. "Alina," she said quietly, "you shouldn't be here. Thorne is furious. He's calling HR." Alina nodded. She didn't look up from her book. "I know." "Why did you do it?" asked Jason Miller, a resident who had always been vocal in his disdain for Alina. He leaned against the counter, crossing his arms. "You knew he was going to cut. You knew the protocol. Why risk your career for a hunch?" Alina closed her book. She looked at Jason, her eyes calm and steady. "It wasn't a hunch," she said. "It was an observation. Mr. Pendleton didn't have internal bleeding. He had a ruptured splenic artery aneurysm that was contained by a hematoma. If you cut into the abdomen, you release the pressure. The hematoma bursts. He bleeds out in minutes. There's no way to clamp it in time." Jason scoffed. The CT scan showed free fluid. Free fluid means blood. Blood means surgery. That's Medicine 101, Alina. Maybe if you spent less time reading ancient texts and more time learning how to read a modern scan, you'd understand. "The CT scan was misinterpreted," Alina said. "The free fluid was actually ascites from his liver condition. The aneurysm was small, hidden behind the stomach. It's a rare presentation, but if you look at his history, if you look at the sudden drop in hemoglobin without a corresponding drop in blood pressure initially, it fits." Thorne didn't look at the history. He looked at the image, and he saw what he expected to see. The door to the break room opened. Dr. Thorne entered. The air in the room seemed to vanish. He looked immaculate, his scrubs pristine, his face composed. But his eyes were cold. He looked directly at Alina. "Ms. Vance," he said, "my office now." Alina stood up. She placed her book on the table. She followed him out, ignoring the stares of her colleagues. She knew what was coming, a formal reprimand, a suspension, possibly the end of her residency. She had saved a patient's life by trying to stop a mistake, and she was being punished for it. It was the ultimate irony. But Alina didn't feel anger. She felt a strange sense of clarity. She had done her duty. The rest was out of her hands. Have you ever been in a situation where you knew the truth, but no one would listen? Where your expertise was dismissed because of who you were, rather than what you knew? Share your story in the comments below. We read every single one, and your experiences help shape the narratives we bring to you. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next chapter of Alina's journey. Inside Dr. Thorne's office, the view was spectacular. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the Seattle skyline, the rain streaking against the glass. Thorne sat behind his massive oak desk, arranging his pens in a perfect parallel line. He did not invite Alina to sit. "You have undermined my authority," Thorne said, not looking at her. "You have disrupted a critical surgical procedure. You have caused distress to the nursing staff and confusion among the residents. This is unacceptable behavior for a physician, any physician." "I was trying to prevent a fatal error," Alina said. Her voice was steady. "Mr. Pendleton is unstable. The aneurysm is leaking. If you operate, he dies." Thorne looked up. His eyes narrowed. "You are diagnosing a patient you are not assigned to based on speculation, contradicting the findings of a board-certified radiologist and a chief of surgery. Do you have any evidence to support this claim? Any peer-reviewed study? Any diagnostic proof?" "I have the clinical picture," Alina said. "I have the history. I have the physical exam findings that you ignored." Physical exam findings are subjective, Thorne snapped. Data is objective. The CT scan is objective. The labs are objective. You are relying on feelings, and in this hospital we do not practice medicine based on feelings. We practice based on science. He slid a piece of paper across the desk. This is a notice of suspension. You are relieved of your duties effective immediately. You will surrender your badge and your access keys. You will undergo a review by the Ethics Committee. If they find that your actions constituted gross negligence or insubordination, you will be expelled from the program. Do you understand? Alina picked up the paper. She read it quickly, then she looked at Thorne. I understand, she said. But please, Dr. Thorne, call for a second opinion. Call Dr. Aris from Vascular. He'll see it. He'll know. Thorne laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. Dr. Aris is in surgery, and even if he weren't, I do not need a second opinion to confirm what is obvious. Get out. Alina turned and walked out of the office. She handed her badge to the security guard at the front desk. The guard, a man named Frank who had known her for 6 months, looked at her with sadness. I'm sorry, Alina, he said. They're saying you lost it in there. I didn't lose it, Alina said. I found it, and now I have to wait. She walked out of the hospital into the rain. She didn't go home. She went to the cafeteria across the street, bought a coffee, and sat by the window. She watched the entrance to the ER. She watched the ambulances come and go. She waited. 30 minutes passed, then 40. The rain intensified, drumming against the glass. Alina checked her watch. She calculated the time since the incision would have been made. If Thorne had proceeded, Arthur Pendleton would be in critical condition by now. The bleeding would be uncontrollable. The monitors would be screaming. Suddenly, her phone buzzed. It was a text from Sarah Jenkins, code blue or 3. Thorne is losing him. Alina's heart skipped a beat. She stood up. She knew she wasn't allowed back in the building. She knew she had no badge, no credentials, no authority. But she also knew that Arthur Pendleton was dying, and she knew exactly how to save him. She ran back to the hospital. The security guard, Frank, saw her coming. He hesitated. Alina, you can't go in. You're suspended. Frank, Alina said, her voice urgent. Mr. Pendleton is bleeding out. Thorne is trying to clamp the wrong vessel. He needs help. If you let me in, I can tell them what to do. If you don't, he dies. And you know I'm right. Frank looked at her. He looked at the chaos unfolding in the lobby, the doctors running toward the elevators. He looked back at Alina. He made a decision. He stepped aside. Go, use the service elevator. Don't let them see you. Alina thanked him and ran. She took the stairs to the 3rd floor, avoiding the main corridors. She reached the observation deck above OR3. Through the glass, she could see the scene below. It was chaotic. Nurses were rushing around. Thorne was shouting orders. The anesthesiologist was frantically adjusting medications. The monitors were flashing red. Alina pressed her hand against the glass. She could see the open abdomen. She could see the blood pooling. Thorne was digging deeper, searching for the source of the bleed, but he was missing it. He was focused on the liver, on the spleen, on the obvious places. He wasn't looking behind the stomach. Alina grabbed the intercom phone on the wall. It was connected to the OR. She knew the code. She had memorized it during her first week. She pressed the button. Dr. Thorne, she said. Her voice echoed in the operating room below. Thorne froze. He looked up at the glass. He saw Alina, his face twisted in rage. Get her out of there, he shouted. Listen to me, Alina yelled. It's not the spleen, it's the splenic artery aneurysm. It's retrogastric. You have to mobilize the stomach. Lift the stomach up. The bleed is behind it. Thorne ignored her. He continued to pack the abdomen with sponges. Cut the feed, he ordered. But Dr. Evans, the anesthesiologist, paused. He looked at Thorne. He looked at the monitors. The blood pressure was critically low. The heart rate was spiking. They were losing him. Evans looked up at the glass. He saw Alina's desperate expression. He remembered her words in the break room. Ruptured splenic artery aneurysm, contained by a hematoma. Marcus, Evans said, wait. Thorne spun around. What are you doing? Pack it. Let me check, Evans said. He moved to the side of the table. He gently lifted the stomach, exposing the area behind it. And there it was. A small, pulsating jet of blood spraying from a tiny aneurysm on the splenic artery, hidden from view until the stomach was moved. The room went silent. Thorne stared at the bleed. He stared at the anatomy. He realized with a sinking feeling in his gut that Alina was right. If he had continued to search in the wrong place, if he had clamped the wrong vessel, Arthur Pendleton would be dead. "Clamp it," Evans said quietly. "Now." Thorne hesitated. His pride was warring with his professionalism, but the patient was dying. He picked up the clamp. He reached in. He clamped the artery. The bleeding stopped. The monitors began to stabilize. The crisis was averted. But the damage was done. The room was filled with a heavy, uncomfortable silence. Everyone knew what had happened. Everyone knew who had saved the patient. And everyone knew who had almost killed him. This is the moment where everything shifts. The hero has proven her competence, but at what cost? If you're on the edge of your seat, please hit the subscribe button. We are just getting started, and the fallout from this revelation is going to change everything. Watch next to see how the hospital leadership reacts to this impossible situation. The surgery was completed successfully. Arthur Pendleton was stabilized and transferred to the ICU. He would live. But in the aftermath, there was no celebration. There was no relief. There was only tension. Dr. Thorne scrubbed out in silence. He did not speak to anyone. He did not look at Alina, who was still standing in the observation deck, watching through the glass. When he finally emerged from the OR, he walked straight to the nurse's station. He picked up the phone. "Security," he said. "Ms. Vance is still in the building. Remove her, escort her off the premises, and confiscate any personal belongings she has in her locker." Alina heard the order. She didn't fight it. She walked down to the locker room where 2 security guards were waiting for her. They were not frank. They were new hires, stiff and impersonal. They watched her as she packed her bag. They didn't say a word. As she walked out of the hospital, she passed a group of residents. Jason Miller was among them. He looked at her with a mixture of awe and fear. He wanted to say something, to acknowledge what she had done. But he didn't. He looked away. He was afraid of Thorne. He was afraid of being associated with the outcast. Alina walked out into the rain again. She had no job, no reputation, no future in medicine, at least not at St. Jude's. She had saved a life, but she had broken the rules. And in a place like St. Jude's, breaking the rules was worse than killing a patient. She went home to her small apartment. She sat on the floor, leaning against the wall. She was exhausted. She was angry. But mostly she was sad. She had loved medicine. She had loved the puzzle of it, the humanity of it. And now it had been taken away from her because she had dared to trust her instincts over a machine. Her phone rang. It was an unknown number. She answered it. "Ms. Vance," a voice said. It was crisp, professional, and authoritative. "Yes," Alina said. "This is Director Helen Graves from the hospital board. I need you to come to the administrative offices tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. Do not be late." Alina stared at the phone. Director Graves was the head of the entire hospital system. She was a formidable woman known for her ruthlessness and her integrity. Why was she calling Alina? Was she being fired formally? Was she being sued? Alina didn't sleep that night. She paced her apartment. She reviewed the case in her mind. She knew she was right, but she also knew that being right didn't matter if you didn't have power, and she had no power. The next morning, she arrived at the hospital at 8:45 a.m. She was dressed in her best suit, a simple black blazer and trousers. She looked professional, dignified. She walked to the administrative wing, a separate building from the main hospital. The atmosphere here was different, quiet, sterile, powerful. She was ushered into a large conference room. Director Graves was sitting at the head of the table. Dr. Thorne was sitting to her right. He looked tired, but his expression was hard. There were 2 other people in the room, a lawyer from the hospital's legal department, and a man Alina didn't recognize. He was older, with silver hair and glasses. He wore a suit that cost more than Alina's annual salary. "Sit down, Ms. Vance," Graves said. Alina sat. She kept her back straight. She looked Graves in the eye. "We have reviewed the incident in OR 3, Graves said. "Dr. Thorne has filed a formal complaint against you for insubordination, unauthorized access to a restricted area, and interference with a surgical procedure. He recommends immediate termination and revocation of your medical license application." Alina nodded. "I understand." "However," Graves continued, "there are complicating factors. The patient, Mr. Pendleton, is alive. The anesthesiologist, Dr. Evans, has submitted a statement confirming that your diagnosis was correct. He states that without your intervention, the patient would have died." Thorne shifted in his seat. "Dr. Evans is mistaken. The situation was complex. I was in the process of identifying the bleed when Ms. Vance interfered. Her actions caused unnecessary delay and panic." "Panic?" Graves asked. She looked at Thorne. Dr. Evans used the word life-saving. He did not use the word panic. Thorne's jaw tightened. He is biased. He has always been supportive of Ms. Vance's unconventional methods. Graves turned to Alina. Ms. Vance, do you have anything to say? Alina looked at Thorne. She saw the fear in his eyes, not fear of her, but fear of being wrong, fear of losing his status, fear of admitting that he had made a mistake. I have nothing to add, Alina said. The facts speak for themselves. Mr. Pendleton is alive. I diagnosed the condition correctly. Dr. Thorne did not. I acted to save a life. If that is grounds for termination, then I accept it. Graves studied her. She looked at the man with the silver hair. Dr. Sterling, your thoughts? The man adjusted his glasses. He looked at Alina with a keen, intelligent gaze. I think, he said slowly, that we are missing some context. Ms. Vance, before you came to St. Jude's, where did you train? Alina hesitated. This was the question she had avoided, the question that held the secret she had kept hidden. I didn't train in a traditional residency, she said. I studied under my grandfather, and then I completed a fellowship in rural emergency medicine in Alaska. Alaska, Thorne sneered. That's not a recognized specialty. It is, Dr. Sterling said, and it is one of the most difficult fields in medicine. You deal with limited resources. No CT scans, no labs, just you and the patient. You have to rely on clinical skills, on intuition, on observation. He looked at Alina. Is that correct, Ms. Vance? Alina nodded, yes. And did you handle cases like Mr. Pendleton, S. in Alaska? Often, Alina said. We see a lot of vascular anomalies in remote populations. Without imaging, you learn to spot them by touch, by sound, by the way the patient breathes. Dr. Sterling leaned back. Interesting, very interesting. Graves looked at Thorne. Dr. Thorne, you pride yourself on evidence-based medicine, but evidence is not just data, it is also outcome. The outcome here was positive because of Ms. Vance, not despite her, because of her. Thorne stood up. This is absurd. She broke protocol. She endangered the team. If we allow this kind of behavior, we undermine the entire structure of the hospital. We invite chaos. Chaos, Graves said, or competence. The room fell silent. The tension was palpable. Alina felt a flicker of hope, but she knew it wasn't over. Thorne was powerful. He had allies. He had tenure, and he was not going to let this go. Ms. Vance, Graves said, you are suspended pending a full investigation. You are not to enter the hospital grounds. You are not to contact any staff members. If you violate this suspension, you will be banned permanently. Do you understand? I understand, Alina said. Good, you may go. Alina stood up. She walked out of the room. She felt drained. She had survived the meeting, but she hadn't won. She was still suspended. She was still an outcast, and Thorne was still angry. As she walked out of the building, she saw a news van parked outside. Reporters were gathering. Word had leaked. The story of the resident who had defied the chief of surgery and saved a patient was spreading. Alina pulled her coat tighter around her. She knew that the public scrutiny would only make things worse. Thorne would dig in. He would fight back, and she would be crushed. Or so she thought. The injustice is palpable. Alina has done everything right, yet she faces exile. But notice the introduction of Dr. Sterling. Who is he? Why is he interested in her background? If you want to find out the truth behind Alina's past and how it changes everything, make sure you are subscribed. Hit the bell icon so you don't miss part 2, where the authority figure steps in and the real reckoning begins. The days following the suspension were a blur of anxiety and isolation. Alina stayed in her apartment, avoiding the news, avoiding social media. She knew her name was out there. She knew people were talking. Some called her a hero. Others called her a rogue element, a danger to the medical profession. The dichotomy was exhausting. She spent her hours reading, trying to distract herself, but her mind kept returning to Arthur Pendleton. She wondered if he was recovering. She wondered if he knew who had saved him. On the third day of her suspension, her phone rang again. It was Director Graves. Ms. Vance, Graves said, I need you to come to the hospital immediately. Am I being fired? Alina asked. No, Graves said. Something has happened, just come. Alina arrived at the hospital to find a scene of unusual activity. The lobby was crowded with reporters. Security was struggling to keep them back. Inside, the atmosphere was tense. Doctors and nurses were whispering in groups. When Alina walked in, the whispers stopped. Everyone looked at her, some with admiration, some with fear, most with curiosity. She was escorted to the executive conference room. This time the room was larger. More people were present. Director Graves was there. Dr. Thorne was there, looking pale and shaken. Dr. Sterling was there, and there was a new figure. He was a tall man in his 60s with a military bearing. He wore a suit, but he stood like a soldier. His name was General David Holloway. He was the chairman of the hospital board, a retired Army Surgeon General, and one of the most respected figures in American medicine. He was rarely seen at St. Jude's. His presence alone signaled that this was no longer a routine personnel issue. This was a crisis. "Ms. Vance," General Holloway said. His voice was gravelly, commanding. "Please sit." Alina sat. She felt small under his gaze. "General," Thorne said, his voice trembling slightly, "I must protest this meeting. Ms. Vance is suspended. She has no standing here." Holloway looked at Thorne. His eyes were cold. "Dr. Thorne, you will speak when spoken to. Is that clear?" Thorne swallowed hard. "Yes, General." Holloway turned to Alina. "Ms. Vance, I have reviewed your file. I have reviewed the incident report. I have spoken with Dr. Evans, and I have spoken with Mr. Pendleton's family." Alina looked up. "How is Mr. Pendleton?" "He is recovering," Holloway said. "He is awake. He is asking for you." Alina felt a lump in her throat. "Why?" "Because he wants to thank you," Holloway said. "But that is not why we are here. We are here because of what Dr. Sterling discovered." Holloway gestured to Dr. Sterling. The silver-haired man stood up. He held a folder. "Ms. Vance," Sterling said, "when you told us you trained in Alaska, you omitted a significant detail. You didn't just complete a fellowship. You served as the lead medical officer for a remote outpost in the Aleutian Islands for 3 years. Is that correct?" Alina nodded. "Yes. And during that time, you were responsible for the health of over 500 people, with no hospital, no specialists, no advanced imaging, just you." "Yes." "And you maintained a 0 mortality rate for traumatic vascular injuries." Alina looked surprised. I tried my best." "You didn't just try," Sterling said. "You succeeded. You developed a protocol for diagnosing occult hemorrhages using only physical examination. A protocol that was published in the Journal of Remote Medicine, but largely ignored by the mainstream medical community because it was considered primitive." Thorne scoffed. "Primitive, that's exactly the point. We have moved beyond primitive methods." Holloway slammed his hand on the table. The sound echoed like a gunshot. "Silence, Dr. Thorne." Thorne flinched. Holloway looked at Alina. "Ms. Vance, your primitive method saved a life in this hospital, a life that Dr. Thorne's advanced methods nearly ended. Why did you not disclose this background during your hiring interview?" Alina looked down. "I was afraid," she admitted. "I was afraid that if they knew I came from a rural background, they wouldn't take me seriously. I wanted to be judged on my current skills, not my past. I thought if I kept my head down and worked hard, I could prove myself." "And instead," Holloway said, "you were mocked, you were marginalized, you were silenced." "Yes," Alina said. Holloway stood up. He walked to the window. He looked out at the city. "St. Jude's prides itself on excellence, on innovation, on saving lives. But somewhere along the way, we forgot what medicine is. We forgot that it is not about machines, it is not about protocols, it is about people, and it is about judgment." He turned back to the room. "Dr. Thorne, you failed to listen, you failed to observe, you failed to lead, and in doing so, you nearly killed a patient." Thorne stood up. "General, with all due respect, I followed the standard of care. The CT scan indicated." "The CT scan was ambiguous," Holloway shouted. "And a good doctor knows when to question the data. A good doctor knows when to trust their instincts. You did neither. You relied on your ego, and that is not medicine, that is arrogance." The room was silent. Thorne looked defeated. He sank back into his chair. Holloway looked at Alina. "Ms. Vance, you have been treated unfairly. You have been punished for doing your job, for saving a life. That ends today. The tide is turning. The highest authority in the hospital has spoken, and the verdict is damning for the antagonist. If you are feeling the satisfaction of justice being served, please hit the like button. It supports our channel and helps us create more content like this. Subscribe to stay with us as we witness the final confrontation and the public vindication of Alina Vance." Holloway walked back to the table. He placed a document in front of Alina. "This is a reinstatement of your residency," he said. with immediate effect. Furthermore, I am appointing you as the lead consultant for clinical judgment training. You will be responsible for teaching our residents and staff how to integrate clinical observation with technological diagnostics. You will report directly to me." Elena stared at the document. She couldn't believe it. "Sir, I don't know what to say." "Say nothing," Holloway said. "Just do the work." Then he turned to Thorne. "Dr. Thorne, you're being placed on administrative leave pending a full review of your conduct. You will surrender your surgical privileges immediately. You will cooperate with the investigation. If the review finds that your negligence contributed to the near death of Mr. Pendleton, you will face disciplinary action up to and including termination." Thorne's face went white. "General, you can't do this. I am the chief of surgery. I have built this department." "You have built a department of technicians," Holloway said. "Not doctors. There is a difference. And until you learn that difference, you will not practice here." Thorne stood up. He looked at Elena. His eyes were filled with hatred. "This isn't over," he whispered. "It is," Holloway said. "Get out." Thorne left the room. The door clicked shut behind him. The tension in the room dissipated, replaced by a sense of relief. Holloway looked at Elena. "There is one more thing," he said. "Mr. Pendleton wants to see you. He is in room 402. Go see him." Elena stood up. Her legs felt weak. She walked out of the conference room. She walked down the corridor. The nurses and doctors parted ways for her. They didn't mock her. They didn't whisper. They looked at her with respect. Some nodded. Some smiled. She reached room 402. She knocked on the door. "Come in," a weak voice said. Elena entered. Arthur Pendleton was lying in bed, hooked up to monitors. He looked frail, but his eyes were bright. He smiled when he saw her. "Ms. Vance," he said, "thank you." Elena walked to his bedside. "Mr. Pendleton, I'm just glad you're okay." "My daughter told me what happened," Arthur said. "She told me that you fought for me, that you stood up to the big boss, and that you were right." Elena nodded. "I was lucky." Dr. Evans listened. "Luck has nothing to do with it," Arthur said. "You saw what others missed. You cared enough to look. That's rare these days. People are too busy looking at screens. They forget to look at the patient." Elena smiled. "You're right." Arthur reached out and took her hand. His grip was weak but warm. "Don't let them change you, Elena. Keep listening, keep looking. The world needs more doctors like you." Elena felt tears in her eyes. "I will," she said. She stayed with him for a while. They talked about his architecture, about his life, about his family. It was a simple human connection, and it reminded Elena why she had become a doctor in the first place. Not for the prestige, not for the money, but for moments like this. When she left the room, she felt different. She felt validated. She felt seen. But she also knew that the battle wasn't entirely over. Thorne was still out there, and he was angry. The emotional core of the story has been revealed. It's not just about medical skill. It's about human connection. If this moment resonated with you, please share this video with someone who needs a reminder that kindness and competence still matter. Comment below with your thoughts on the importance of listening to patients. And don't forget to subscribe for the final act of this drama. The next week was a whirlwind. The news of Thorne's suspension and Elena's promotion spread throughout the hospital. The culture began to shift. Residents started asking questions. They started looking at patients, not just charts. They started valuing observation. Elena led workshops. She taught them how to listen to breath sounds, how to feel for pulses, how to read the subtle signs of distress. But Thorne did not go quietly. He hired a lawyer. He filed a grievance. He claimed that he was being targeted because of his age, his status, and his adherence to protocol. He claimed that Elena was unqualified and that her appointment was a violation of hospital policy. The hospital board scheduled a hearing. It was to be held in the main auditorium, open to all staff. It was a public forum, a chance for the truth to be aired. The auditorium was packed. Every doctor, nurse, and administrator was there. The atmosphere was electric. Thorne sat at a table on the stage, flanked by his lawyer. Elena sat at another table, alone. General Holloway presided over the hearing. Thorne's lawyer spoke first. He presented a slick, polished argument. He talked about standards, about liability, about the dangers of allowing untrained personnel to override established protocols. He painted Elena as a reckless amateur who had gotten lucky. He painted Thorne as a victim of a witch hunt. The crowd murmured, some nodded. Thorne's influence was still strong. Then it was Elena's turn. She stood up. She didn't have a lawyer. She didn't have a script. She just had the truth. "Dr. Thorne says I am unqualified," Alina said. Her voice was clear and steady. "He says I relied on luck, but luck is not a strategy. Luck is not a diagnosis. What I relied on was training. Training that I earned in the field. Training that taught me that every patient is unique, that every case is different, and that technology is a tool, not a master." She looked at the audience. Medicine is not an engineering problem. It is a human problem, and humans are messy. They are complex. They don't always fit into algorithms. If we want to save lives, we have to be willing to look beyond the data. We have to be willing to trust our instincts. We have to be willing to listen. She turned to Thorne. "Dr. Thorne, you are a brilliant surgeon. No one denies that. But you forgot the most important part of being a doctor: humility. You thought you knew everything. You thought the machine knew everything. And because of that, you almost killed a man." Thorne stood up. "Objection," his lawyer shouted. "This is hearsay. This is emotional manipulation." "It is the truth," Holloway said. "Let her finish." Alina continued. "I don't want to destroy Dr. Thorne. I want to help him. I want to help all of us, because if we don't learn from this, it will happen again. Another patient will die. Another doctor will be blinded by their own ego, and that is unacceptable." She sat down. The room was silent. Then Dr. Evans stood up. He walked to the microphone. "I am Dr. Evans," he said. "I was the anesthesiologist in OR3. I can confirm that Ms. Vance's diagnosis was correct. I can confirm that Dr. Thorne ignored her warnings. And I can confirm that if Ms. Vance had not intervened, Mr. Pendleton would be dead. I stand by her, and I stand by her methods." One by one, other staff members stood up. Nurses, residents, even some senior surgeons. They spoke of times when Thorne had been dismissive, times when he had ignored their concerns, times when they had felt powerless. Thorne sat there isolated. His lawyer whispered to him, but he didn't listen. He looked at the crowd. He saw the disappointment in their eyes. He saw the respect they had for Alina. He realized with a sinking heart that he had lost, not just the hearing, but the trust of his colleagues. Holloway banged his gavel. "The board has reached a decision," he said. "Dr. Thorne's suspension is upheld. His privileges are revoked. He is terminated from St. Jude's Memorial Hospital, effective immediately. Ms. Vance's appointment is confirmed. She is hereby promoted to attending physician and director of clinical integration." The auditorium erupted in applause. It was loud, sustained, and heartfelt. Alina looked up, tears in her eyes. She had one, not just for herself, but for everyone who had ever been silenced, for everyone who had ever been overlooked. Thorne stood up. He looked at Alina one last time. There was no anger in his eyes now, only shame. He walked out of the auditorium alone. The villain has fallen, not with a bang, but with the quiet weight of collective truth. The public nature of this justice ensures that the lesson is learned by the entire institution. If you enjoyed this satisfying conclusion to the conflict, please hit the like button. It tells us that you value stories where integrity triumphs over arrogance. Subscribe to ensure you're here for our next narrative journey. 6 months later, St. Jude's Memorial was a different place. The culture had shifted. The hierarchy was still there, but it was softer, more collaborative. Doctors listened to nurses. Residents spoke up. And Alina Vance was at the center of it all. She had established a new training program. The Vance Protocol, they called it. It combined advanced technology with classic clinical skills. It was becoming a model for other hospitals across the country. Alina was no longer the quiet girl in the corner. She was a leader, a mentor, a voice. Arthur Pendleton had fully recovered. He came back to the hospital every month to visit. He and Alina had become friends. He often sat in her office, telling her stories about his buildings, about his life. He was her reminder of why she did what she did. One afternoon, Alina was walking through the lobby. She saw a young resident, a new hire, standing by the window. The resident looked nervous. He was holding a chart, staring at a patient in the ER. Alina walked over to him. "What's wrong?" she asked. The resident looked up. "I'm not sure, Dr. Vance. The labs are normal. The CT is normal, but the patient looks wrong. I can't put my finger on it." Alina smiled. "Trust that feeling," she said. "Go talk to him, ask him about his pain, look at his eyes, feel his pulse. The data will catch up, but your instincts are already there." The resident nodded. He took a deep breath. He walked into the ER. Alina watched him go. She felt a sense of peace. She had changed the system. She had saved lives, and she had done it by staying true to herself. She walked out of the hospital into the sunshine. The rain had stopped. The sky was blue. She took a deep breath. She was no longer the outcast. She was the code whisperer, and she was just getting started. This story is a reminder that competence often wears a quiet face. That humility is a strength, not a weakness. And that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply to speak the truth, even when your voice shakes. Thank you for joining us on this journey. If this story inspired you, if it made you think about the value of listening and the danger of arrogance, please share it with your friends and family. Let's spread the message that integrity matters. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to our channel. We have many more stories to tell. Stories of injustice, of courage, and of redemption. Stories that remind us of the best in humanity. Until next time, keep listening, keep looking, and never stop believing in the power of the truth. This concludes our narrative. We hope it left you with a sense of hope and vindication. Please take a moment to comment below. What is one instance where your intuition saved the day? We love hearing from you. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more high-quality, fictional narratives that explore the depths of human character. Thank you for watching.